What was the scariest city you've ever been to? Story 1. Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea. At the height of the Iraq War, it was still listed as more dangerous. The gangs ran the city, driving around in technicals with mounted machine guns. Hotels had 6-foot-thick concrete wall defenses with razor wire and armed guards. For an added cost, they offered violation cages, a cage that would drop down over your bed when a sensor was triggered to protect you from being violation if people broke in. Story 2. Port-au-Prince. Saw a newly shot woman on the sidewalk, and the next day, a human finger in a trash heap. Answer: holy crap. I came here to say the exact same thing. I went there for earthquake relief in 2010, and we were escorted everywhere by armed guards and weren't allowed to walk anywhere. We could only travel by car. We were there 10 weeks after the earthquake, and at night they would put the bodies in a huge pile and burn them. We all came home with horrible upper respiratory infections. Because of it, they were also everywhere in the streets. Some of the medical stuff we dealt with, I can't even mention here. And the saddest thing is that it's gotten 10x worse in the years since then. I get emotional just thinking about it. Story 3. The doorman in my hotel in Johannesburg stopped me as I was walking out and told me, "You won't last 5 minutes out there. Go back to your room where it's safe." Answer: yep, I was going to say Johannesburg. Super sketchy. But funny enough, Soweto is, or at least was, when I was there, is extremely safe. We walked around at night and went to bars and restaurants, and we would get high fives from the locals, and everyone wanted to talk to us and were incredibly friendly and welcoming. Apparently in Soweto they depend on tourism so much that if you're caught mugging a tourist, they'll go full mob justice and beat the shoot out of the mugger. Story 4. Kingston, Jamaica. I switched hotels to one more secure. Early on my last morning, I was going to the airport, and my original hotel was on fire. Answer: I have a permanent scar on my forehead from Kingston. A little reminder of my last visit to Jamaica. People scampering to get on a bus, climbing on each other's backs. An old-fashioned Coke bottle was thrown at the bus and exploded into the crowd. One shard hit me right above the eye. There are no ambulances or police to come rescue you. Had to walk for a few miles in the heat to the nearest doctor covered in blood. Got stitches. Boarded the plane with a bloody patch on my head. Fought the urge to kneel down and kiss the carpet at the Philadelphia airport. Story 5. Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea. Every property surrounded by solid fences, topped with razor wire, and if you can afford it, patrolled by armed guards and guard dogs. As a visitor, you should never use a local taxi or walk outside your hotel compound at night. Answer: I went there as a 15 white boy with blonde hair and blue eyes for their national swimming comp, and we were hosted by families. The lady hosting us said to me right after we got there, "If you want to go for a walk, don't take any money or wear a watch because you will get robbed." The word will was so crazy to me. Not if or could, it was will. Others that stand out. They had a 14-year-old security guard who was a member of the most feared gang in PNG, so younger than me. They informed us that this is because if anyone touched their home, they would enforce it. They had a beautiful home, but it was surrounded by barbed wire and 2 huge German shepherds and 2 maids. They had satellite with every movie in the theaters and hundreds of channels. They informed me that copywriting was not enforceable in PNG True not, I didn't care. It was awesome. One of the best swimmers at the comp was attacked and stabbed with a piece of corrugated iron, and his friend abducted on the first night of the meet. Anytime there was a red light at a stoplight, they just blew through it because they would get carjacked. People would stare at you and smile and have these crazy eyes and bright red stains on their teeth from eating battle nut. It was so hot and humid during the day, they didn't let us compete from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. There's a lot more. With this, the place, the people, the culture is insanely beautiful. Story 6. Decades ago, on a college trip to Europe, we went to Kosice in Slovakia. We got to the hotel, and I asked the front desk worker, in English, mind you, if it was safe to walk to the local bars and restaurants. She replied, no. I thanked her, took a taxi. We were there for 4 days, and every time I asked if it was safe to go here or there, everyone always responded with, no. At the time, I thought Slovakia must have been the most dangerous place in the world. Years later, I found out no is Slovak for yes. Story 7. Johannesburg. When you stop at a red light, you have to be ready to punch the gas as there are broad daylight carjackings at intersections. Story 8. Rizhao, China. Not scary so much like the others. China is insanely safe, but extremely creepy. I felt like I was on a movie set. First off, it's a city of 500,000, but it's built for a population of 10 million. But it's not like those ghost cities out west, where there never was anyone. It seemed like it was actually a big city, but everyone just left suddenly. The beaches were well maintained and empty. The buses ran frequently and were empty. The streets were lined with all the usual Chinese stuff and were empty. We went into a breakfast restaurant, and the food was great, but we were the only custom, and the staff seemed surprised to see us. We asked for directions to the famous fish market. No one there could tell us where it was. It turned out to be about 750 meters away. It was massive and filled with vendors selling huge quantities of incredibly fresh fish. It was mostly empty. Also, almost everything was open until the wee hours of the morning, if not 24 hours. This is unusual even in the biggest Chinese cities, let alone this abandoned town. It was just an unsettling experience all around. Answer. This reminds me so much of when me and my girlfriend went to Halong Bay, but we ended up in Halong City. Almost sounds identical to what you're describing. We had people taking pictures of us because no tourists ever went there. Essentially, people who go to Halong Bay go via Hanoi and not Halong City. It felt like an abandoned Call of Duty map for Vegas. Deafening sound of crickets. Story 9. Johannesburg. It's the only place I've been where the pilot tells you before landing where to go and not to go, what to do and not to do if you don't want to get robbed, mugged, or eliminated. Story 10. Juarez around 2007. They told me that the cartel had some heads hanging from a bridge for everyone to see, and they didn't get taken down until several hours later. Story 11. Juarez, Mexico. I'm an Irish Mexican. Redhead. Went with cousins to see my aunt and uncle. At the time, 2007, it was the most murderous city on earth. My family members were in a cartel. There was a cartel war going on. Had armed men all around at all times for all the money and cars and opulence at their home. It was like being in prison. The tension in the air was thick. I was treated like a king, but that whole week I was terrified inside. Different world. Was told, no matter what happens, do not call police. They worked for the other guys. I was told that if shoot kicked off and anyone made it through the gates, to grab a gun and shoot myself, that would be the best possible outcome. I haven't been back. Answer: this journalist did a story on Juarez around that time. He followed the homicide detective around. They got a call for a takedown on the road, a hit on a car. One person they eliminate, left lying in the street, the other on their way to the hospital in an ambulance. Then they got another call, another homicide down the street. It was the ambulance. They finished the job. When they get back to the forensics lab, they have something like 20 bodies from that day alone. I can see this is very shocking to you, but this is just a normal day. Tomorrow there will be 20 more takedown and no chance to solve any of the takedown. It was seriously horrifying. I actually had dinner at a huge Mexican place in El Paso back in 2012. It was weird because half the people most likely lived across the border in a war zone, but everyone was having fun, eating dinner, celebrating Quintera, etc. Story 12. Port Moresby, New Guinea. Expats live in compounds with massive walls topped with broken bottles. Even my mother, who is a missionary who has lived in a variety of countries throughout SE Asia and the Pacific, couldn't live there for more than 3 weeks. I had warned her not to go, having been there twice myself. Story 13. Juba, South Sudan. I saw a military transport with child soldiers, a firefight with artillery across the White Nile from where I stood, and someone tried to rob me at the actual airport. Story 14. Tijuana. I saw a dead body on my way to the bus terminal, just laying on the sidewalk. There were people standing around him, smoking, drinking, and just having a good old time while dude is just dead, like dead af, stiff, purple and blue. Wildest shoot I've ever seen. No one gave a single shoot. Story 15. Was in St. Louis with my cousin and we crossed that bridge. East St. Louis has got to be the most dangerous feeling place I've ever been. Street lights busted out at night, everything run down, abandoned, bullet holes in the stop signs, etc. We pulled up GPS and got the fudge out of there real quick, lol. Answer: I opened these comments to type East STL, then stopped myself thinking, nah, you're just a Midwesterner who hasn't traveled enough of the world yet. Kind of reassuring to hear from others that I wasn't just exaggerating. It really is a good place to go if you want your money, your ride, or your life taken. I mean, I remember being super low on gas and having to stop to fill up, and the guy working came out and said, "Get back in the car," and then kept pumping for me. 3 black SUVs immediately pulled up, and he stopped pumping, slapped the side of my car with a double tap to let me know he was done, and I peeled the fudge out of there. Story 16. I'm not sure this counts, but I drove through Gary, Indiana recently. It was fudge weird. I have never seen many abandoned homes buildings and homes. The neighborhoods were decrepit and deserted. I didn't see anything shady happen, but it was fudge weird. I was diverted there by my GPS when returning to Chicago from Michigan while driving on 90. I got stopped at a train crossing when the train came to complete stop. I said nope and drove back to the highway. I'd rather sit in bumper-to-bumper traffic through purgatory than to have to drive through Katy again. Story 17. Tijuana. I lived there for 2 years as a runaway teen. This was over 30 years ago, but I'm fairly certain it hasn't gotten better. Story 18. St. Louis. It was weird for a few reasons, but The scariest was when I was leaving the hotel. Myself, my mom, and my 2 large dogs were staying at. We saw a man messing with my car like hood was propped. As I started raising my voice and approaching with my large barking dogs, he ran. I made sure to push the hood down so it would latch. Or so I thought. We loaded the car up and drove away as fast as possible. As soon as we got on the freeway, the hood blew up and almost hit the windshield. I honestly have no idea how it didn't. Maybe a safety feature. So I had to pull over and resecure it. Mofo obviously messed something up on purpose because he pulled up behind us. I got back in the car, my digs and mom losing their chute, drove slowish, put my hazards on, and my mom called 911. He sped off after taking pics. Weirdest experience of my life. The hotel was so sketchy and my intuition was telling me to leave the entire time. I honestly think the man was in on something with the hotel staff, or was hotel staff himself. My 2 dogs were extremely on edge and they're generally easygoing. Plate numbers were stolen and police could and wouldn't do anything. Answer: I worked in downtown St. Louis. I was driving out of the parking lot at work last summer for lunch when a car with 4 dudes with their heads wrapped up like the Mujahideen pulled into the parking lot and slowed down to stare me down. I noped out of there pretty quick and waited for the security guards to do their thing. Had someone get shot outside of my work one afternoon, and again another afternoon, and again another afternoon. I'm in the downtown tourist area. It gets much, much worse when you go north. The news doesn't bother reporting on a shooting unless there is a fatality, and it is a slow news day. Don't go north and avoid I-70 through downtown. If it looks sketchy where you are, then you need to hurry up. Stop signs are optional. East St. Louis and the cities immediately around it are not a place to be after 9 to 10 p.m. Story 19. Garberville in Humboldt County, CA in the 90s. This was why before pot was legal, and as an outsider you were absolutely looked at. Like you were a fed. Scariest darn town I've ever stopped in. They made a doc about the area. Yarsk, it's called Takedown Mountain. Answer: I passed through Garberville once every couple of years, and actually stayed there while writing a book in 2020. The locals still look at you weird. What's especially strange is that it's right on top of NorCal's main arterial highway, 101, and the biggest town between Eureka and Willits. So I know they're getting a lot of traffic stopping for food and gas. Story 20. I went to college in Utica, a city in central New York, primarily run by the mafia. It was ranked as one of the 10 safest cities in the US at the time. You could walk anywhere as long as you didn't interfere. In the 4 years I was there were 3 takedowns. A guy who turned state's evidence was shot in a crowded bar, but no one saw or heard anything. Another locked themselves in the trunk of their burning car. It was ruled a tragic end. And someone jumped into the river in midwinter. Another tragic end. Added Utica. Answer: You're talking about Utica. The car fire was 2 guys locked in the truck of a burning car. The crowded bar thing I never heard, but I'm sure it's a thing. I drove garbage truck for a little while, and a guy that drove through the 90s would always talk about how the owners of the company were so nice. They'd often stop the truck en route, tip them a few hundred, and throw some stuff in the back of the truck. The routes were always super early in the AM. Story 21. Cairo in Egypt. As a white non-Muslim female, the amount of intimacy harassment I experienced was unprecedented. because I didn't necessarily worry about someone attacking me or stealing from me, but I worried about other things happening. The entire country is impoverished and corrupt. At one point, I saw a police officer hold a child, like 7 years old maybe, at gunpoint because the child was acting out and he thought it was funny. At another point, a person got hit by a car and a couple bystanders were doing everything they could while most kept on walking as if nothing was even happening. I was at a restaurant near there and it took over 30 men for an ambulance to get there. I'm unsure if he made it. I can't even tell you how many homeless children I saw begging for food money with no parents anywhere to be found. I've been to other countries where this is a common scam tactic, but this was totally different. The reality is that when a country is that corrupt, public safety goes out the window. That is actually what scared me most about it. Answer: this didn't happen to me, but my uncle and auntie. For some context for what follows, my uncle was about 6'7" and built like a rugby player, and my auntie looked like your stereotypical blonde 20-yo trophy wife. It was in the 90s, and they went to Cairo for a holiday. They didn't have to worry too much about people harassing them or scamming them, due to my uncle being huge, until a vendor asked my uncle, "How much for my auntie?" My uncle, who was not thinking, said 20 camels, to which the vendor yelled, "Deal," grabbed my uncle's hand, shook it and tried to drag my auntie away. Well, my uncle was having none of that and punched him. They ended up having flea cario, as there was an angry mob trying to A, beat up, eliminate my uncle, and B, take possession of my auntie, till the day he died. My auntie did not let him live down the time that he sold her for 20 camels, and she nearly became some random guy's property. My wife really wants to go to Egypt to see the pyramids, as she has been fascinated by them for years now, but I refuse to take her. Story 22. Probably Cairo as a teenage girl in the 90s. I got groped and had my hair pulled everywhere we went, and was intimacy assaulted and nearly violation. Story 23. I have traveled lots of places in this world. The most scared I've ever been was lost in downtown Baltimore at night on a weekend. I had made a series of mistakes trying to go around the city and had accidentally taken a spur that put me right into the downtown. I have no clue what area of town I drove through, but the only human beings that I saw out and about at 3s in the morning looked like zombies. It's really hard to describe, but the way that they moved, the way that they looked at me as I drove by, it was very scary, out of desperation. This was way before cell phones did anything. More than phone calls and basic texts, I was still using a paper atlas. I stopped at a 7-Eleven. I was waiting in line to ask directions, and a guy went out of his way to ask me what I was doing there. That's how much I stood out. I told him that I was trying to get directions to get back onto the highway, and he told me that he was an undercover cop. Things were about to go down right there, and I needed to leave. I told him that's what I was trying to do. He thought about it for a second, told me to get in my car, follow him, and try to keep up. He would get me to an on-ramp and then go back to the store. He drove like a bat out of hell and did get me to the freeway and then busted a U-turn and flew away. I have no clue how bad my night would have continued to be if he hadn't been there and guided me out of there. Story 24. Shreveport and Baton Rouge are doing the world no favors, besides inspiring more seasons of True Detective. Story 25. Nuevo Laredo, Mexico. Not all, but whatever part of San Bernardino. I got off the freeway at night to stop at a gas station to call my sister for directions. When I told her my cross streets, she said, "Get back on the freeway right now." I looked up and the crackheads were circling my car and tapping on my window. Story 26. Cairo Western tourist women stand out, and everyone wants to scam you or violation you, or scam and violation you. Answer: I've been a couple times alone, as a woman. This might be total bullshit, based only on personal experience, but I think there is a big culture clash between the way women in Egypt are socialized and the way Western women are socialized, and it doesn't go the way we think, based on stereotypes. A woman in Cairo is threatened, pissed off by a guy on the street. She just starts cussing him out, loudly. A crowd gathers, because as far as I could tell, Egyptians love nothing more than a great argument. And then the issue fizzles out, and she is often fine, although not always, realistically, because the whole crowd is there. Western women would almost never. We're taught that being obvious, loud, angry responding increases risk and, more importantly, is rude. I had a cab driver keep me in the cab, driving all over the city for like an hour and a half. He wasn't kidnapping me. I could understand him asking other drivers for directions. He was a man refusing to admit he was lost. I finally yelled at him to let me out, and I'd find a more useful driver. He did, then wanted more payment because he'd spent more time than the price we negotiated. I disagreed because he was incompetent. Like 10 people on the sidewalk immediately started taking sides and arguing over my verbal contract with this useless cabbie. It was bizarre and totally foreign to me, but completely non-threatening. There is definitely an ongoing level of threat in every moment you're in public, but the tools Western women use to evaluate risk don't work well. My personal suggestion for women traveling alone, which has always worked well for me: you're okay anywhere. Anytime that preteen and young teenage girls are walking around with friends rather than brothers or parents, levels of risk scale up from that. But that is safe and you can chill a bit. Story 27. Overtown and Liberty City neighborhoods of Miami. I lived not too far from there 20-some years ago. Drove a coworker home one night because she missed the last bus. She called some guy on her phone to tell him to let people know not to mess with the blue Focus about to come down the street. I felt like I had a hall pass from danger. Story 28. Shreveport, Louisiana. Felt like I was going to get shot while getting gas. Whole place felt like a shithole. Story 29. Furnace Creek, Passing Valley. Beautiful, lovely, calm. But if you wander away during the day, you will die every which way, including the meat of your feet, cooking like chicken breast until you keel over, unable to walk or survive. Story 30. Belfast, Northern Ireland in the 90s. In the non-tourist parts, I'll never forget the "you're one of them" stares. Story 31. East Berlin before the wall came down. I went as part of a tour, but I was hyper-aware of my active duty status and scared the whole time that I'd be frog-marched into a van and whisked away. The whole place that we were allowed to see was gray and gritty and depressing AF. The people looked wary or depressed. It was just kinda tragic. Story 32. Los Angeles, more specifically Skid Row. Grew up with a single mom, ended up homeless and living on the streets for a bit of time in the 90s before we were able to get back on our feet. Oddly enough, 10-year-old me was too naive to understand what was going on with substances dealers and gangbangers in those streets. But looking back now as a full-grown adult, I wondered how we survived. Story 33. East St. Louis the Fur. A white guy with my GF in the car stopped there for gas, and a cop pulled up behind me, asking what I thought I was doing there. I replied getting gas, and he tells me that I'm not safe and told me he'd